Good morning. I'm Bonnie Gardner. I'm co-chair of the Public Affairs Forum of the First Unitarian Universalist Church. Welcome to our forum program. Our programs are free and open to the public most Sundays at noon. Our mission is to nourish the mind and the spirit and serve social justice. For more information about our forum programming, you can go to our church website at www.austinuu.org. And we're located at 4700 Grover Avenue. Again, we would love to have you attend our programs. Today, I'm honored to introduce our speaker, Ken Altus, who's been fascinated by cars since his early teen years, and he has now amassed over 9,000 photos of cars of all types, sizes, and makes, beginning, I believe, with vintage models from 1911 and running to the present. His artistic photos reflect his self-professed deep emotional relationship with cars and are consistent with the enshrinement of the car as a centerpiece in the American way of life. These cars will reflect the eras in which they're produced, their owners' personalities, preferences, values, and socioeconomic status. They're totems, in a way. His photos, of course, will often also reflect evolving technological and manufacturing capabilities. As Ken presents his photos, he's going to share interesting stories about some of the more unusual cars, their owners, and their relationships with the cars. Ken Altus has lived in Austin since 1970. He attended UT and obtained a degree in history, fittingly. He now works as a realtor and is the founder of Eco Homes Austin. He's also a very skilled home inspector in Austin for many years and an expert on energy efficiency. Recently, the Austin American-Statesman had an extensive feature on Ken's car photos, which you may have seen. So we're going to have a real treat seeing all of Ken's photos. Ken, thank you again for being willing to present. Come on up.
Hi, thanks very much. It's great to be here. Thank you, Bonnie. Bonnie and I worked together at Travis County Human Services some years ago and developed a strong relationship then. So it's so good to hear from you again and to be here. When I was a kid, we went to Unitarian church, and my main memory of it is that we picked pecans outside, and they talked about astronomy, in the classroom. And I didn't think that was really. I thought maybe when you go to church, you should have a little more anxiety and fear. So I've started. I thought that was part of church. So I've started my slideshow with some kind of scary cars. So I'm just going to let this thing go. If you see anything that particularly interests you, have questions about, you can surely ask. But these cars we're looking at are really associated with the Rat Rod or the Lone Star Roundup show that we have here every year. But they're incredibly creative. And so, in any case. There's a lot to talk about. I don't really want to talk to you about the technical aspects, particularly of the cars. I don't think that's my primary interest, although I've learned a lot about it over these years. But really, what they mean to me, I think that the pictures have an emotional element to some degree, and some of them I think maybe are a little bit attractive. What I do is what a number of people do around the country and the world. It's called car spotting. I didn't realize that until after I was well into this. But it's really, for me, it was documenting the cars that I saw every day. A lot of the cars in this slideshow that I have on my website are show cars, like this one we're looking at now. But I'm as interested or more interested in the cars that are behind the garage or rusting in the fields, and the cars that really aren't the glamour cars. There's something. I don't know. It sounds like a very funny thing, but I have certain emotional feeling towards cars to some degree. I guess maybe a lot of people do. I was going to start with one, kind of how deep that goes, I guess. I've had a recurring dream for, I think, most of my adult life. It doesn't happen too often, but I am a car, basically. And what I'm aware of is that I'm holding the axles and the wheels are on the outside, and we're going quickly down the street. And it seems quite normal. Maybe I want to go faster. Maybe there's a bump. And, and I start to wake, and I have this moment when I think, I don't think this is right. And I go through a long period. I don't know how long it takes in real time, but I kind of struggle. I say, no, I don't think you are a car. I think that, and I say to myself, there's a difference between muscle and blood and steel and oil. It takes me a little while to remove myself from the car, and then I'm awake. So if it seems like I have an emotional interest in these cars, maybe I do. Maybe it's something Bonnie can help me with as a psychologist, but it's there. So, in a way, I wanted to call this a boy's story, rather than just a dry thing about cars in Austin. I'll get to some of that information. But when I was a kid, of course, like a lot of boys, maybe girls too, but not so much it seems, I had a real interest in it. Met a fellow in fourth grade. His name was Larry Bloom. So to a large degree, I almost should be dedicating all of this to my childhood friend. And he was a very odd, eccentric guy, an iconoclast, came from California, which is where all the hot rods come from. That's really our mecca, is California. And he was spinning on the gym bars, like a replicant in any case. So I got to know him. And he was my buddy. I was his sidekick, really. He would build cars with a hammer and a drill and vice grips, kind of, and guitars, too. And I was just kind of like his sidekick. And we'd go, and I'd be impressed with what he did, and we were car buddies. One of the things we did together is, once we could drive, which we both were able to do at 14 with motorcycles and cars, but is we'd go out and we'd drive into areas that were lower income, or they were warehouse districts, and we would try to see what we could find. So we were car spotting too. We were doing that as 14, 15, 16-year-olds, and that was a wonderful thing to do. So Larry passed on rather early in life, and so I've been carrying on, I guess. And so a few years ago, I kind of got back to it, I guess. I started taking pictures with a buddy, and we posted them on a website, and kind of shared them. It was, hey, I saw this car, let's post it, see if anybody else is interested. And he wasn't quite as committed to it as I am, so the thing fell by the wayside. And then I started about 2.5 years ago, atxcarpics.com. And so I kind of got my act together a little bit. I've got about 1,400 posts. I post every day, and probably 5,000 or 6,000 photographs are online. And these are some of them. These are the better photographs, I would say, and kind of a random selection, though. I was looking for my script. Maybe I put it in my pocket. Well, let me. Do you see my papers back there? One of the things that I want to talk about. Oh, there it is. Thank you. That's fine. Thank you. One of the things I discovered while I got back into cars, I've always been interested, but through my adulthood, but when I got more interested, is I learned that there are a lot of cars that look like the cars that my friend Larry built, which were cobbled together, didn't have much money. They're kind of Frankensteins, and you'll see some of them here, where someone with very limited resources will get an engine here, a fender there, and just put it together. How it looks isn't as important as the fact that it's a creative, construction that they all did. And so a number of years ago, I either rediscovered that it was there or there was a renaissance in it. But that's now what people are calling rat rods, and they aren't painted. They have flat black, or they have rusty surfaces, and so they're not made to be pretty. They're effective, and they're inexpensive to build. So it is the most democratic. It is the most. It's the easiest way for people to get into this car culture. And Austin has a tremendously vibrant car culture, and I'll describe some of the aspects of it that I've discovered. But the Lone Star Roundup, which is a car show in the spring, I guess there have been 14 of them now. It's probably the preeminent show in the country for rat rods, and it is the creation of Steve Wertheimer and maybe some others, but Steve Wertheimer is kind of like the godfather of these rat rods and classic cars in a way, but he owns the Continental Club, and now he owns Seaboys, which is a new place on South Congress. And he bought on South 1st Street a venerable garage that worked on hot rods and old cars for years, called Dave's Perfection Automotive, but he runs that, and that's one of my stops. You know, I live close by there, so there are shops I go to, and then there are cars I just see on the side of the road. But I know that there are several shops in town that are going to have some really interesting cars. Now, one thing we're seeing here are cars from the historic races at the Circuit of the Americas. We're really lucky to have a world-class. Well, it's a Formula One track, very expensive, just near Del Valle. And in the fall, they have historic races, and they have 400 or 500 cars, and they're from all different eras, and it's very exciting to go. And not many people go. Formula One has got too many people, makes it hard to go. But at the historics, you can go and park next to it and go into the pits and talks to the drivers and the mechanics and other people. By the way, this is Woody. We have a little bit of Woody in here just to leaven it a little bit, so I hope you think Woody's as cute as I do. So if I can find a truck or a car rusting in a field, that's made my day. When I see a car, so not to make this too psychological, but I do think I have a sense of an empathy for it in a way. Is it there's a certain dignity to it. There's a certain, obviously loss because it's at the end of its life. Of course, you get to see nature take over, because of the rusting and the other things that grow on it. Now, this is a hot rod that was at the old Austin Speed Shop, and it's really, I don't know what year it is. I guess that's a Ford, but that's very cool. This particular car is at Dave's Performance, but this is an early hot rod, so you can see they've chopped the top. It's a little lower. But that has a 1920. There's Woody. It was a 1928 car with a 1932 engine in it. So it's a very, very early hot rod. So that's a niche, vintage hot rods, not hot rods that we build today, but with old parts. And that's part of the car scene here, and they're very much sought after. One of the cars that we'll see here is a rat rod at the Lone Star Roundup, and it's just terribly ugly. It really is hideous, and you'll agree when you see it. But no one holds that against it. That's just part of the originality of it. I actually heard someone talk to the owner of the car, and he said, "Why is your car so ugly?" And the guy said, "I didn't plan it that way. It just came out that way." So in any case, so here's a Cadillac without a bank of headlights. I love the sense that time is passing. This is an Izetta at a modern house. That was an open house for that, but it was a nice contrast. Yeah. This truck and a bunch of others you'll see in a minute have just been removed off of East 5th or 6th, and I was sorry to see them go, but at least I got a lot of pictures, I think the next several. But this was extremely exciting for me to find these old trucks, this one in particularly, intact. And one of the criticisms you may have of my pictures is they're a little lurid. I'll accentuate the red, or saturate the colors. And that's a mood I'm in. Maybe I'm getting over it now, but it does show the imperfections in the surfaces. So so I was going to talk about the several subcultures within the car culture in Austin. Of course, there are the rat rods we talked about, and that's probably the biggest group of car people. We have a lot of meetups around town at hamburger places, and that are every week or every month, like Cars and Coffee at Oasis. And a lot of people come out with really nice cars. So there are a lot of great cars that you don't see. They don't drive them very much. They just go to these things. And I think that part of my impulse to take these pictures, for example, these trucks now are gone. I don't know where they're gone, but we'll never see them. I'll never see them again. But part of it is to take just to grab them while I can. I have subtitled my website a serendipitous inventory of Austin's, weirdest and most interesting cars and trucks. And well, that's it. So at least I have pictures of them. And part of the appeal for me is not only to see the cars, but also have the pictures and to be able to manipulate them and admire them and so on. Of course, the other classes of enthusiasts in town include, I think, one way the most interesting, and these are the esoteric, historic motorcycle people. There's a shop in East Austin that kind of has it to the, I think they're kind of the leaders in this, Revival Cycles. And these are earnest, young, skinny men in long beards, and they know all about the history of the motorcycles, and they rebuild them. And I have photographed there. By the way, this is a 1960 Cadillac, and my father was a traveling salesman, and he bought Cadillacs every year or two until he died. And I learned to drive on his cars, and so I have a particular interest in Cadillacs. And it turns out that when I put them on my website and Facebook page, the Facebook page is particularly useful for me to evaluate how interested people are in a particular one. But people like these Cadillac pictures. In any case, I do too. But they mean a lot to me. This picture here is of the showroom, and this is one of their cars. It would be interesting to talk about this. It's an Argentinian find. A Roland Pallane is what it's called. But in Motorium is unique in Austin in that it is a dealership and it is an auction. They don't, I guess they auction, but they send a lot of cars to auction, maybe 300 a year. But they've got the biggest facility. They've got the most cars, and in the range from 1911 to much more recent. But a lot of my pictures are there, and they let me come in and they let me take pictures even when the place is closed, if the door's open. So in any case, this is a 1961 Cadillac. It's a really beautiful coupe. I was thrilled to see this. This is actually in front of a restaurant, kind of a trendy restaurant, I think on East 5th. But Motorium also has an auction side called, let me see if I'll think of it in a second. And they just had some wonderful cars that they found, I think, towards Jonestown, that were a barn find. Of course, everybody around cars are excited by the notion of barn finds. That's kind of everybody's ideal. And they found some old 30s Cadillacs and some electric cars, all pre-war, and those went to Indianapolis auction from Motorium. So another subgroup is the exotic cars, the Ferraris and the Lamborghinis and the McLarens and so on. And I'll have to say that as much as I would love to have one of those cars, if I see a Ferrari, unless it's an old one, I don't turn around. Of course, that's part of what Austin's become. We see them. I don't know if you see them. I see them. I don't know if they catch your eye. But I'm more interested in the older ones. Now, this is a Citroen, which is a real favorite of mine. But in any case, there are some used car dealerships that deal with these exotic cars, like Elite and the Mosing motor cars. In any case, that's one level, and there's also they have an interesting new facility called the Petrol Lounge, and that is if you have the means. So this is the upper crust, really. This is the expensive way to own cars, but this is a Cobra. So let me just say, this is, for me, this is automotive Viagra. This is the only car that I just feel such a strong need to, that sense of power. Now, it won a lot of races. It was very significant. It's very good looking. People tell me they're awful to drive, but I don't want to believe that. That may be one of the few cars on my bucket list, if there is one. Here's a Rolls Royce at Motorium. But at the Petrol Lounge, for example, there's a big, secure warehouse, and if you've got a few extra dollars in a $1 million car, they'll keep the battery up, and they'll keep the tires pumped up, and drive it once a week. So when you want your little puppy, it's going to be ready to go out and play. So that's another level of the car culture in Austin. This is a Corvette in front of a Goodwill. Back to the different areas of cars. The one that I'm interested in is this hot rod business. Where old cars are fixed up, sometimes made beautiful, other times kept kind of rough. But what I didn't know, this is my lack of experience, is that a lot of these cars that you see that are old are new underneath. They're completely new underneath. And it's a bit of a growth industry in Austin. One of the original companies doing it is Mercury Charlie's, and he's done it for 30 or 40 years. And then there's the Austin Speed Shop. Now the Austin Speed Shop is a venerable old place. It just had to move. It was on South Lamar, and of course real estate prices moved it out. but it was owned briefly by Jesse James. You know, he had a car show on cable, I think, where they'd modify things. And he moved to town, and he married America's sweetheart, Sandra Bullock. Then he did her wrong, and I don't know in what order. He cut a finger off. You know, it's on YouTube, believe it or not, while he was at the speed shop, and now he's gone. As far as I know, everybody's glad to see that, and he's sold his interest in the speed shop. There's another place out southwest. There is a very successful company here, Collins Guitars, and they make mandolins, I think, and guitars, thousands of them, but they're extremely expensive, and they're beautifully crafted, and all the stars have them. I mean, they're really an elite. Now, this man has now turned that dedication to hot rods, but it's a business. So if you take them, your 1950 Chevrolet, and you say, I want this thing to be just as groovy as possible, they'll do it for you, but it could cost you $100,000 or more. You know, new suspension, new engine, you know, disc brakes, of course. So, one of the back to the motorcycles, which are really so interesting, I think, and revival cycles. They have a motorcycle there. I've seen a bunch. I've photographed a few times, called a Bruff, B-R-U-G-H, and it is the kind of motorcycle the Lawrence of Arabia died on. And I think he had his 8th one on order when he died. In any case, this particular Bruff, I think, is a 1933. It just completed a 4,000 cross-country cannonball run, I guess. And so it is the longest. It's a stock motorcycle, and it's the longest trip that really any Bruff has probably ever made, and maybe any 75-year-old motorcycle, however old it is. In any case, I went to see it. I went back to the shop, and it was still there, dirty. They didn't want to take the dirt off from the cross country. So these people are really odd. In any case, this car is a Lincoln. I'm sure that is brand new underneath the steel, but it's a gorgeous big Lincoln. I think about a 32 or 3. I don't know the year, but this was a very impressive car. Another category, and Coke just gave me this wonderful CD with a bunch of art cars. And I guess you can say this is maybe an art car, but typically you'll see some others. But when I see them, I try to photograph them. But they're a very interesting subcategory. You see how creative these cars are. The whole interior is made up of old signs. And can you see the hand and the knuckles? There are some great stories that I run across. One at South First Performance Automotive, which is one of my wonderful stops where there's always something going on. There was a 61 Cadillac, big white sedan, and that's nice enough. That's a real find for me. But on the hood, and it's somewhere in the slideshow, artists signed the hood. And it turned out that, and one of them was Dale Watson, and I looked up a couple of the other names, but they're, Texas artists, musicians. This was a German band that had come to the United States, bought an old Cadillac, and they're going to drive it across the country and have a little experience. But I thought that was, I'd love to know more about the band and how they did, whether they made it. So I have the motorcycles interest me a lot. The cars do. The choppers that we see so many, that's a very distinct Here's a really flamboyant chopper. But the choppers are a very distinct little niche. The people who have the Ducatis and the European types are very different culturally, probably, and aesthetically, interests from the chopper fellows. One thing that I was very struck with is how remarkable are the craftsmen in these hot rod shops. The first thought was, they're just greasy, handed mechanics, and they're putting these rough things together. But I'm allowed, fortunately, to go into the back and take pictures. That's one of the pleasures of doing this, is that once the people know who I am, they just let me slip in. And so I get to see what's going on. And some of the craftsmen will stop and talk to me. They're interested in what I'm doing, and I'm certainly interested in what they're doing. But if you look at the curve, so many of these cars have these big, voluptuous fenders, for example, like this old car. And most of the cars they get are all banged up. They're all twisted. They're in bad shape. And they have these like old world tools with compound curves on them, to make the thing perfect. And you see they take these cars, which are really just shells and rusted and damaged, and they make them into these beautiful, beautiful finished products. And so I think it's hard. And so they do, when the cars sell for $100,000, there's a legitimate reason for that. They're worth it. And they're probably good investments, too. I don't know what the future will be, but a lot of these are slightly distorted. This is me having a little bit of fun. But a lot of people ask me, do I want any of these cars? I want very few of them, actually. I enjoy them as artifacts, as the or the environment that we're in. I appreciate the technological elements because I know generally what's underneath the hood and the evolution, let's say. But there's a sculptural element. In any case, most of them don't, except the new hot rods, I guess, and the very exotic ones, probably don't drive that well. So they're more moving sculpture, at least in my view. I have a late model sedan, and it's got all the electronic brake assist and all of that. It's fast and it's quiet and reliable, and that's pretty good. Now you see the bumpers on this and the little pasties on there? Did you see that? Those are called Dagmar bumpers. Do you remember what that? Dagmar was a Hollywood starlet who had a prominent physique. In any case, they're called Dagmar bumpers, and they were part of the American cars in the 50s. Questions? Any comments? Yes, sir. Oh, Bonnie's going to come to you. The places that you want me to name the great shops, the great places in town? Well, in custom car rebuilding, there's Murpho's in South Austin. There's the Austin Speed Shop. There is Mercury Charlie's. I would say those are, I'm sure I'm leaving out some, but those, see this, in any case. For motorcycles, it's Revival Cycles is the most interesting one for me. Also, Austin Moto on South Congress is a wonderful vintage motorcycle place. For exotic cars, there's Jeff Mosing Motor Cars in North Austin. It's a showroom, and he owns most of his cars. Most of them aren't for sale, but they're there. Some of them are for sale. It's a nice dealership. There's Elite Motors in Northwest off 620, I think, in Anderson Mill. to me, the richest source of cars is Motorium on 620, near between 2222 and 183. Yeah. You're welcome. Hi. No, never considered it.
Were you able to hear me?
I did. You asked.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yes.
Ask again.
Okay. So, this Melanie. Hi.
Hi.
I was wondering if you've ever considered publishing a book. I would love to have a book of your photographs. I love old cars myself, and came from a father who was a member of the Horseless Carriage Club in Houston, and I used to ride in the Thanksgiving Day Parade in somebody else's car. And so anyway, I'm just curious to know if you'd ever considered that, because I think that would be wonderful.
No, I hadn't. Give me a little more encouragement, and I'll think about it. You know, this really developed out of just a need for me to, when I saw a car, to remember it, I guess, and then to hold on to the photographs. So, and really, the first bunch of photographs are really crappy. And for the longest time, I just used my iPhone, and I'm a little upgraded from that. But I do appreciate that, and I'd love to think about that.
We have a question from Jim Bryce. Jim?
Fascinating talk. Of course, growing up in that period of time, the 40s and 50s, when the cars just took off.
Right.
I have fond memories, even going back to the 32 Ford Coupe that you showed.
Uh-huh.
But I'm wondering, you mentioned in several instances cars in which the undercarriage, I guess, was completely new. Could you describe what that means and how that works, and also how that affects the authenticity in these circles?
Well, I think the authenticity is a great, difficult question, and I'm not that insightful or wise about it. Certainly, when I see an old car, I want it preserved, but they're awful to drive, you know, in a practical standpoint. So there you have this conflict. Obviously, it's pretty obvious. You know, you've got this wonderful sculptural body, and but mechanically they're very, very insufficient, and so you won't drive them, or they won't be safe, or they won't be reliable. So I guess I'm making my peace with it in most cases, or many cases, that the argument would be that a lot of these bodies are saved because they become a useful transportation. So what they'll do, I'm always impressed with people who are so resourceful that they can pull something apart and just make something new out of it. In any case, I guess the frames are probably usually retained, but they'll cut off the front suspension. They'll take a suspension from a Chevy. I think a Chevy 2 is a real common one, from an 80s car. It has disc brakes. It has coil springs. They'll take the rear end. It could be even independent suspension, which is really very modern, or not, and they'll take it out of a car or a truck that has enough strength to take the power, you know, of a new engine. So in any case, the suspension will be entirely new, front and back. Then they often will use Chevy engines. They always have. I mean, this has been from the small block in '55, you know, the 327s and so on. I guess these are much later versions of it. And they're LS1s. I don't know all the numbers, but they're very compact. They're very light. They're very powerful, and they can even get them out of trucks, Chevy trucks. They're out there. They're electronically, you know, managed, and power is. There's a lot of power. Sometimes they'll soup them up and they'll get 500-600 horsepower, but you can easily get 350, 400 horsepower, really, at the junkyard just by pulling out one of these Chevy engines or others. Did I more or less? Yeah.
feel then that the frame in the cars that have frames, of course, a lot of the cars, and I assume at this point we've got 50 or 60 years, are going back in some of the American motors, maybe into the 40s and 50s of unit body construction, and that would be a different project.
I think so.
In retaining that and making that work.
I think I would say virtually all of these are frame on bodies, or body on frames. And I don't know if the unibody, which started to be used in the 50s, I guess, is that right? That must, be another level of a challenge.
We have a question from Douglas Bauer. Douglas?
You showed an amazing selection of cars today. If you were able to drive any car in the world, which one would it be, and where would you try to drive it?
Where would I drive it? Honestly, the ones that I think that most interest me are newer Ferraris, the front-engine V8 or V12 Ferraris. I don't know all the numbers, but they're modern cars. But I guess with a few, I'll tell you what the most iconic car is that I would love to experience would be a early 50s Mercedes 300 SL. This is one of the great classics. Yeah, with the gull wing. And I have there was one at the Mercedes dealership here, and someone told me it's there, so I went and got great pictures of it. It's just achingly beautiful to me, and but it could have been $1 million car. But I don't know if they handled that well. They had these old swing axles, but they sure set the tone for a long time. But so when it comes down to it, it's going to be a European car, to be honest with you. I don't think they don't have they have a lot of appeal. There's Woody. But they're not quite as full of emotional content as a lot of these cars do, at least the pictures of them. For example, this Chevrolet right here, it's a four-door. It's in Montopolis. It's on, blocks. And I just find it fascinating. It means so much. I can't even explain all the things it means to me. And here's a Jaguar. Now, this is an XK140. When I was moving around as a kid with my buddy Larry, we found an XK120, which was very much like that, without an engine. We had to drive into South Dallas to get it, and we pulled it out. We dragged it out of someone's backyard and took it to his house, and he put a Chevrolet 427 in it that he had at that point in a 1950 Hudson sedan. So this was like a real original rat rod. And here's a car going still on the road, this old Chevy. But the funny little story about Larry is he came to pick me up once in the Hudson. This is a big old green thing. He bought it just for a couple $. By the way, do you look like your car? So, any case, it had Rust-Oleum. I'm not sure what they use now, but in the old days, if you had rust on metal, you had to sand off the rust. Then you put this maroon paint, Rust-Oleum, on it. And so Larry came to pick me up. Mom went out to say hi to him, look at his car. And she said, "When are you going to paint it?" And he looked really lost. It was painted. He'd taken care of the rust, so he had all these red spots on it. In any case, that's the rat rod ethic. Now these are it's Motostalgia, the Motorium auction element, and this is an auction they had last year at the Long Center, and what a great setting for pictures. So that was fun.
Ken, do you think that car owners' personalities seemingly match their cars? We say that dogs and their owners look alike. What are your thoughts on it?
I haven't seen that. What is remarkable about the owners of cars, most of the cars, is how friendly they are and how much they want to talk about their cars. I'm not a terribly outgoing person, but sometimes if I see an opportunity, I'm driving, in a neighborhood, I'm taking the back roads for this purpose, and I'll see a nice car, and I'll see the owner outside. I'll stop sometimes, and they always want to talk about their car. They're so warm about this question. So the only thing, we're all kind of, many of us are similar age. The only thing I would say is how disappointed I am when I see some of these very sexy hot rods. I expect sexy young men and women to get out of them, but they're not. They look like me.
We have a question from Marcus Barnes. I don't want to block the camera.
Yeah.
Maybe move to your right a little. Thank
Yeah, I've enjoyed this very much.
Thank you.
Here is a question, preceded with a couple of comments. Stanley and White made fairly successful steam cars for a while.
Yeah.
Now, but Doble persisted with a steam car up through, I think, about 1931 or 32.
I think that's
Have you ever come across one, or could you make any comments on it? The Doble steamer.
I did find it's a Doble. Is that what it said? Doble? I never speak of. I would read it, but there was one, and I have a picture of it somewhere on the website. There was I think it was a member of their family that owns liquor stores. I think it's a Lebanese family, a very significant Austin family for a long, long time, for 100 years. And one of these fellows had some collector cars. I think it's now just gone, in an old garage on East 6th, I think it was, just a block off the highway. And there was a Doble there. It was a steam car, yeah. So I think and it was pretty cool to see, yeah. And I do have one Stanley steamer that I got at Dick's Auto Museum, I think it's called, in San Marcos. There used to be a really big, wonderful car museum in Rosanki for years and years and years, with 100 or 200 cars, and they dissolved it, whatever. And some of those cars went to San Marcos. But it's an interesting question.
We have another question from Jim Bryce.
Well, you opened a can of worms there because you talked about the steam cars, and then you gave us a little nibble a moment ago, and I'm going to follow up on it. You mentioned the electric cars,
right?
Which of course come from way back in the I guess in the teens or earlier, up through the 30s. Then we've had this hiatus, and now they're coming back. Tell us about what you've seen and what your observations have been on the electric cars in these collections.
Well, most of them aren't very sexy. They're all new now, and there are a lot of them in this parking lot, so I'm going to be careful what I say. Well, I don't know much about them. They had the same problem then that they have now, batteries, I think. But I think they were often called cars for women. You didn't have to crank them, and they weren't noisy. They were really very, very convenient, but I guess the range was the question. The batteries is always. But except for this barn find I mentioned early on, I've not seen any electric cars out in the field.
Another question from Douglas Bauer.
You opened with this dream about being a car, and I wanted to follow up on that. As a car, have you ever had a collision with another car?
That's an interesting dream. I guess I'm trying to repress. So I can't go any deeper than that. I think I'd have to be on Bonnie's couch, before I could get that deep. There was My Mother the Car. That was no. This Ferrari right here is $1 million car, and this is at the Petrol Lounge in North Austin. But that is for the Cognoscenti, one of the great iconic cars. Of course, that's just I guess that's a Model A. Mm-hmm. What I was going to say, and this is a very important Porsche. They made a few of those recently. But, and this picture is at Flamingo Garage, just north of campus on Guadalupe. And, sometimes these garage owners are enthusiasts, sometimes they're just businessmen. But this guy's an enthusiast. He had some nice cars that were his own in the back. I was going to say, one of my favorite stops when I move around town and look where I know cars will be is at Ron Shimmick's garage. It is about 5,500 north. It's on Romeria, I think, but North Lamar. And he does British cars, his specialty, from the 50s and 60s. And I find them, and I really do like MGs, Triumphs. In fact, my first car was a Triumph, a TR4, that had a Chevy V8 in it, and it almost killed me. I broke my leg racing. I didn't admit this for years in public. I told my parents in high school that I don't remember what happened. I remember very well what happened. I was racing, drag racing on the streets on Marsh Lane in North Dallas, and someone in a 59 Chevy pulled in front of me, and I made some poor choices in evading it and ruined the car and my leg temporarily. But I'm not sure why I got that admission.
We have a question from Jerry Frazee. Jerry?
Thank you. This is a little bit of a tangent, but I've been dying to know for years, what on earth is it about some of those Italian cars that make them worth literally $1 million when they're sold at a dealer? I just don't understand it.
The engineering costs a lot of money. You're asking why they're worth $1 million. I think Ferraris are probably average $250,000-$300,000, and Ferrari is owned by Fiat just for the fun of it. And it's funny, they've made it a better car, but they are on the forefront of engineering. Of course, they race. Racing improves the breed. That's been the belief of car manufacturers from the beginning. And they're at the cutting edge, so their engines and their suspensions are always the next step. They're the finest engines and the finest suspensions. And I would say probably Lamborghini is owned by Audi, right? But they made it better, and so these. I think that's it. I think that I'm sure their profit margins are high, but they are extraordinary cars, and they're technical leaders, and they're no. And one of the reasons, one way you'll know that is, I guess, if there's some relationship, if they continue to win races, it would be probably logical to assume that technology is working its way as quickly as possible into their cars. And their cars really, Ferrari is still a preeminent mark, and they deserve it.
We have a question from Russell Eskew.
Let me just say one more thing about that. I'm sorry, but one of the appeals of cars for many people is art and science, the merging of the two together. And when Ferrari does it, actually they're not always beautiful, but when they are beautiful, the two come together, and the whole is a very remarkable achievement, a human achievement, I would say.
Russell?
How about pickups? In Texas, we like pickups.
And there are a lot of custom pickups in Austin, and a lot of really nice ones. So, and there'll be a bunch of them, on my blog. But there's no shortage of wonderful pickups. I'm not sure how many of them are used. In fact, I posted one yesterday, a 70s blue Ford pickup, a very ordinary pickup, but it was sitting low, had big tires, and that's the trick. That's the trigger for us when we're looking at cars. And how many people shared it on Facebook? A lot. Now, to me, it was the least interesting car that I'd posted, but people like their, whatever the demographics are, but it was a truck and pretty ordinary to me. But one thing I was going to tell, if you are into cars, you'll know this, but what makes a car attractive, and this can affect almost every car, is its stance. That's the phrase. how it sits on its wheels, its tires, and you can have there are any number of situations where you'll see cars lowered, and that's the reason. For some reason, it makes them much more appealing. Put a bigger tire in it, much more appealing. So it all has to do with stance. That's one of the insights, I think.
We have about 5 minutes left, and Larry Quartz from our forum committee has a question.
Ken, at one time, Austin had a strong antique car club. I remember Lloyd Doggett, father, was one of the leaders in that.
Uh-huh.
And I haven't seen those around for some time. Could you comment on that, please?
Well, I don't see too many antique cars. They're probably in garages and not driven so much, I guess. So, and I haven't, since my exposure is mainly car spotting, just driving out and seeing what's out there. I don't see it. I don't know much about it. I'm sure they're still there, but that's the area that I'm weakest in terms of exposure and pictures. Well, it's great to be here. Thanks so much. Great to talk to you all and share this passion of mine. When I think about what I'm doing, it's not a business. It's just deeply satisfying, and it's a way also to socialize and talk about it with other people, get closer to other people. But I think to some degree, I am showing my long-lost friend what he's missing. Thank you very much, and it's been great to be here.
Thank you, Ken. And I think this is such a refreshingly different forum for us, and equally important, though. It's just a window into a whole subculture and a type of art that I don't think many of us know much about. So thank you again for coming, and we'll look forward, hopefully, to more photos and maybe even a book evolving.